Hello and welcome to our first ever full set spoiler review. Something I've wanted to do since I started the channel and trying to make the time for it here. We're starting off with white, and as a quick reminder for any of you guys that want to support the channel and the store, you can find all of these products on ELD's TimeVaultGames.com, booster packs, booster boxes, and more. We don't have the singles up yet, but if you're looking for just sealed product, we would be happy to help you out with that. Adherent of Hope kicks things off. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control a boss-free planeswalker, put a +1/+1 counter on Adherent of Hope. Really just a little bit of synergy there. I don't expect that to be really playable outside of casual. It is a 2-mana, 2/1, so it's possible in limited that Grizzly Bears will be solid enough for draft and with a little bit of an upside. If you have the 3-mana boss free, certainly this could get out of hand. Outside of that synergy, nothing spectacular here. Alpine Watchdog, same mana cost here. We pick up Vigilance and an extra point of toughness. This puts it a little bit more in line for the weenie aggro strategies. Being able to swing and potentially block or chump block with this guy is a pretty reasonable bear for 2 mana for limited, and no real application outside of that, except for perhaps Dog Tribal. Angelic Ascension, exile target creature or planeswalker. Its controller creates a 4/4 white angel token with flying. Very interesting card, similar to Beast Within, a card that sees a ton of play, and also there's a new white version of that from Modern Horizons at 3 mana, and this could see some play. Certainly in limited, a 4/4 for 2 mana is ridiculous. If you can respond to removal from your opponent in a draft or sealed game, you are probably going to be winning. 2 mana for a 4/4 flyer is absolutely incredible, and I think that's probably how we're going to see this one played. Expect to see people getting blown out by this in limited. Anointed Chorster. Choirster? I'm not even sure how we say that. You can let me know in the comments. 1/1 with lifelink, and you can pay 5 to give it +3/+3 until end of turn. 1/1s for 1 generally end up being trash in limited. It's a very common error for new players to try and make them work. They usually just don't have enough punch to be worthwhile. The fact that this has 5 mana activated ability to potentially make it a very solid card in the late game is interesting. Still feels like a trap to me, but a interesting card. The fact that it's not immediately obvious to everyone how to evaluate this card, I think, is a good thing. And sometimes experienced players end up being wrong on these ones as well. But it does feel like 1/1 for 1 really not going to be able to get in there for very long in the early game. And if you're paying 5 mana for that effect, not super spectacular. 10 mana, sure. I suppose if you're really flooding out, you've got a game-winning creature here, but I don't want to spend too much time on that one. Aven Gagglemaster, great name, good stats, and the ability to gain a bunch of life and get this 4/3 flyer down for 5 means this is going to be a massive tempo shift for any airborne deck in limited. Again, not much application outside of that. Baneslayer Angel. Now this is constructed quality right here for sure. When this first came out in the early M10 and M11 sets, it completely dominated standard. They've kept the iconic art from Greg Staples, and we'll see how it fits in. I believe this will be introducing it to Pioneer. It was already in Modern, but a very powerful card here. Bossry, new Planeswalker. This is from the Planeswalker deck, and I mean, it's a Planeswalker deck. I don't expect this to make it even unless it's a super casual commander deck. It does put +1/+1 counters on there, and there's some fun that can be had with that, particularly when splashing green. That's about it. 6 mana Planeswalker with an ultimate that probably wins the game if you're doing some type of token generation. Bossry Cat. Now this is the actual Bossry from the booster packs. This one at 3 mana is often... anytime you get a 3 mana Planeswalker, you really got to look at it and see, because we've seen the lower casting cost Planeswalkers are very, very difficult to balance, even when they don't look like they're going to be particularly impressive. Putting a +1/+1 counter and indestructible for a creature is pretty impressive. The indestructibility wears off end of turn, but it makes blocking an absolute disaster. I'm glad that it doesn't last until your next turn, because that would just turn it into a defensive nightmare, and you really wouldn't be able to get in to hit this guy. The -2, whenever one or more non-token creatures attack this turn, create that many 1/1 white soldier creatures that are tapped and attacking, kind of exponentially growing your creature base. That is pretty easy to miss. Like, doubling up like that can really catch people off guard. Thankfully, it's non-token, so it's not like actually exponential growth. You're just doubling that one time, and then later on you're not doubling your whole force. So if you had 5 creatures, you go to 10. The next time you use it, you get another 5, not the 20. That would be completely out of hand, Krenko style. And the emblem is at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 soldier and put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So pretty much you've got the staying power there. You're going to be able to outlast a lot of board states with that. So interesting Planeswalker. Doesn't really feel like the type of thing I'll be sleeving up in any of the strategies that I'd be employing in Legacy, but an interesting card and probably a welcome addition to Commander tables. Bossry's Acolyte, lifelink 2/3 for 4. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 other target creatures you control, so can't target itself, leaving this as an interesting flicker target. I'd say maybe there's some synergy here for a mid-range Pauper deck. The fact that it's common, the stats on this pretty weak, but the entering the battlefield and pumping up the rest of your team is an interesting card, though I don't really expect it to see any play. Bossry's Aegis, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. You may search your library and or graveyard for a card named Bossry Devoted Paladin, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. They always put these Planeswalker cards in the Planeswalker decks to kind of give synergy and give the players more access to their Planeswalker that comes with the deck, and really drives home the flavor of the Planeswalker as well. So, fun, flavorful card. Again, nothing really there for constructed. Bossry's Lieutenant has a ton of text on here. A 4-mana 3/4, so we're not that far off. Vigilance, protection from multicolored, gets interesting depending on the meta. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So actually you can plus itself as well. Whenever it or another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter, create a 2/2 knight. So interesting. I mean, I would not be surprised if this type of card sees play in Standard. Potentially a 4/5 Vigilance for 4 mana. When it dies, you get a 2/2. This card seems totally fine for Standard, at least past Standard formats. I have no idea what Standard will look like moving forward, but a very interesting card, and seems like a pretty high power level there for the mana cost. Bossry's Solidarity, putting a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. The low casting cost on this could be fun to reuse in a commander deck, being able to pull this back from the graveyard, recasting it, flashing it back, that type of thing. Could be a lot of fun. In Limited, it's a pretty interesting overrun effect depending on how aggressive your board is, getting +1/+1 counters. I mean, you need a bunch of creatures for this to be super good, but an interesting card. Celestial Enforcer, 2 mana, tap target creature, activate only if you have a creature with flying. So we've got a 3 mana 2/3 with a activated ability to slow down your opponent at the cost of some mana. I'm sure this will be fine in Limited. Not a top pick, but a very interesting card. The 2 mana and tapping definitely makes a big difference when you have to bog down your mana. Though tapping creatures in Limited ends up being very good, and it's really at its best when you're able to do that on your opponent's turn. Then they're tapped, so they're not even able to block. It essentially is just removing their best creature every turn, and that is pretty difficult to deal with in Limited. Concordia Pegasus, a 1/3 for 2, maybe in some tribal or flying themed sealed decks and drafts. This will be good enough to make the cut. That is about it. Containment Priest, here we go. This is a printing. Containment Priest, flash, 2/2. If a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it. This is a literal vintage playable card. It is at home amongst the most powerful cards ever printed. And while itself isn't an incredible threat, it is a great answer to many strategies now in Modern and Pioneer. So this is a very big printing for those formats. And of course, it'll, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the price? It could absolutely plummet it, which is my bet. However, broad use in Pioneer and Modern can also greatly increase demand. So there's definitely going to be pressure in both directions. The fact that there's a ton of these getting printed, that's obviously increasing the supply. However, the demand is now significantly higher, and there's a non-zero amount of demand that comes along with the reprint just because it makes people more aware of the card. So perhaps more Commander players will see this for the first time and think of it as an excellent answer to some of the more busted strategies that they face. Daybreak Charger, just a 3/1 for 2, a little bit more in line with what I'd want to see if I'm playing an aggressive white deck. 2 1s and 2 2s for 2 mana with some removal and a little bit of combat tricks can be super spicy, and I think this is actually very good for limited. Getting a +2/+0 until end of turn, pushes through extra damage, makes blocks difficult, and I actually like this card. I also like the 3/1 for 2 stats. I've played that with no upside many times in some of the earlier nights for drafting, where you're just smashing people 2-0 in 15 minutes, and you've got like a half hour to trade, which is, to be fair, a strategy that I used to try and employ quite often. Trading always a big part of the game for me. Defiant Strike, this is actually a pauper playable card, so that's nice. It is a reprint, however, so really just more access to a card that was already super easy to get. But this way you don't have to sift through your bulk. Sees play in the mono white, what would you call it? It's a heroic deck in pauper. You've got Laguna Bond Elder or Trailblazer, one of them. It's a 1 mana 0/4, and whenever you target it, it gets a +1/+1 counter. That guy gets out of hand super fast, and Defiant Strike cantrips, keeps the good enchantments going, and is a welcome addition in that deck, despite it does also have some pressure from competition from some new printings as well. So it has seen play in heroic. We'll see if it still continues to make the cut. Dub, a 3 mana enchant creature. The creature gets +2/+2 for +2/+2 first strike and is a knight. This just has excellent flavor. Not super excited about it. It's probably a trap. You're likely just setting yourself up to get 2 for 1 here. First strike is a type of evasion in limited. It's also a type of creature removal, in that if you have a big creature, it can stay back and really make it difficult for your opponent to attack, nullifying their creatures. Especially like small death touch creatures, that would normally be a problem. But yeah, generally you're going to get 2 for 1 with these type of cards, and it's going to feel pretty bad. Faith's Fetters is +4 life, and you shut off one of their creatures. This is a reprint. It's been very good in the past. A card that people absolutely were wrecked by in its earliest printings in, I believe, Ravnica. And just the ability to stop a creature and gain life really lets the slower strategies totally turn the corner and stabilize. Falconer Adept. Whenever Falconer Adept attacks, create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying that's tapped and attacking. Nice little card for limited. Not the most exciting. Those initial stats of 4 mana for a 2/3, of course, not the best, but has an upside of creating 1/1 birds. Certainly incredible in an open board. You'll just run away with the game there. If you have synergy with other flyers, this could be really good and limited, but that's about it, as a lot of these cards are going to be. Feat of Resistance, +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, and protection from the color of your choice. Brutal combat trick, especially in those type of weenie decks that are looking to swarm early and often. Basically blanking their removal, or in combat just creating an absolute nightmare scenario where your guy lives, their guy dies, and your guy's bigger for having the experience. This is a solid combat trick for limited. At 2 mana, it's not the best of the best, but it's definitely a card that you need to play around and be aware of in limited. Gale Swooper, a 3/2 for 4. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gains flying until end of turn. This can be really powerful. Effects that allow a creature to jump can be pretty brutal in limited. The fact that it's a 3/2 flyer for 4 is slightly overcosted, but giving a jump effect means that this is definitely a card that's going to see play in limited without embarrassment. Glorious Anthem, a reprint with some static around it. It is a kind of attempt at one-upping Crusade from back in the day, and it only affects your creatures, not your opponent's creatures. And at 3 mana, not super good. I don't have too much to say about this one in this video. Griffin Airy, at the beginning of your end step, if you've gained 3 or more life this turn, create a 2/2 white Griffin token with flying. That can pile on the card advantage in the right type of deck. Expected to be better in draft than it is in sealed deck, as you can have a more focused approach to your life gain and have more synergy with it. But a stream of 2/2s is really difficult to deal with, and most likely going to be triggered off of lifelink. And just an interesting card. Fun to build around. Idol of Endurance. This is an interesting looking card as well. 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield, exile all creature cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard until this leaves the battlefield. And then you can pay 1 and a white to cast a creature from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. This can create a lot of value and potentially could have some type of combo applications as well. Interesting card for people to build around, and I think people will have fun with this potentially in Commander as well. Legion's Judgment, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Not the best removal in this format, I'd imagine, at 3 mana and sorcery speed, and only creatures with power 4 or greater. Of course, big creatures are scary, but there is better removal, and sorcery speed is very punishing. Leaving that mana open with a instant tends to be a better strategy instead of having to tap out and just take out one of their creatures. That's, of course, if they even have one with power 4 or greater. I've certainly won and lost many games of limited without it, without having a creature with power 4 or greater on board. Promise of Light. Enchanted creature has whenever you gain life, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. That is the type of text that everybody wants a Johnny's Pride Mate to have. That card only gets a +1/+1 counter each time you gain life, not equal to the number of life that you gained. So this kind of gives people something that they want to really buff up a creature super fast. Of course, it's an enchantment, setting you up for getting 2 for 1, but depending on the type of removal in the format, I mean, who are we kidding? You're going to get 2 for 1, but maybe you'll have some fun beforehand. Makeshift Battalion. This is a reprint, and basically has the Legion? Battalion? I think it's actually Battalion is the mechanic. I can't remember. Whenever Makeshift Battalion and at least 2 other creatures attack, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So 3/2 for 3, not the best, but you know, that quickly gets overcome in runaway games. And the fact that it gets it when it attacks, not when it deals combat damage, means you're jumping up to a 4/3 on that first attack. If you do a 1-drop and a 2-drop, play this on turn 3, by the time this attacks, you're actually getting that battalion if everything goes smoothly and limited. Mangara the Diplomat. This I expect to be a card that people play around with in Commander. The 4-mana 2/4 has lifelink, and whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or a planeswalker you control, you draw a card, really making board politics a little more interesting, incentivizing people not to attack you, but also whenever an opponent casts their second spell, you draw a card. So it's definitely the case in Commander where people will just run headlong into these type of effects. We've seen Rhystic Study. The reason why that card's so good is because people literally just let you draw the cards. It's just the way it is in Commander. Like, people, maybe it's different where you're at, but I mean, if it was a tournament, you would not play a spell into a Rhystic Study. You would pay the one, you'd make sure they don't draw any cards, but people are there to have fun, and they're going to play their cards regardless of your silly enchantment or your silly Mangara, so expect people to just let you draw cards off of this at most tables. 9 lives, difficult card to evaluate, so it has hexproof, 3 mana investment, and if a source would deal damage to you, prevent all damage, inputting a incarnation counter on 9 lives. When there are 9 or more, you exile it, and if it leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. So, of course, you don't want to get blown out by something like a Tranquility effect, a Reverent Silence, anything like that. That would feel awful. But the main idea here is trying to keep a defensive posture and prolong the game. It's possible that we could see some type of donate style effect, and that could be amusing. And that would be with some type of Reverent Silence effect as well. I mean, it's an interesting card that gets people thinking and talking. It's obviously a lot of life gained when you're talking about something like attacks from Tarmogoyfs or like large mid-range threats. And remember, this is a triggered ability, so when it leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. That means that you can stifle or trick bind, or actually just end the turn, as we'll see with the blue spoilers. So this could buy an awful lot of time in some type of standard deck, perhaps. But overall, interesting card. People are going to love the art, which is very flavorful. Pack Leader. Other dogs you control get +1/+1. Dog Tribal is a thing now. Whenever it attacks, prevent combat damage that would be dealt this turn to dogs you control. Interesting that it doesn't make them indestructible, just prevents the combat damage. So playing cautiously with this one. They don't want dogs to be able to just Wrath of God and stick around. They're just going to be good in combat, and just a little bit better with that +1/+1 as well. So Dog Lords have arrived. Lord of Atlantis has some competition, and the fact that this is 1 and a white allows you to actually play a variety of different colors of dogs, which is a smart move. Traditionally, Lords are very heavy with their mana requirements. Lord of Atlantis, Elvish Champion, the Goblin Chieftain, the list goes on. Usually it's double mana, and here they decided to keep the mana cost low and have a variety of doggos from all sorts of different colors. Speaking of other dogs, look at this one. Just ridiculous. Rambunctious Mutt. When it enters the battlefield, destroy an artifact or enchantment an opponent controls at 5 mana. This is just kind of an interesting utility card. You can get this effect a lot cheaper, but this body is not inconsequential. If you're getting a 2/2 body off of a card like this, it's perhaps not as interesting. So I think in Limited, a 3/4, even if you don't blow up an artifact or enchantment, tends to be a little bit better than playing some overcosted 2/2 that is usually the type of thing that's tacked on to this type of effect. Revitalize, gain 3 life, draw a card. Some people love this card. I've seen people talking about like playing this card in Legacy. I don't know why. It's a reprint, and it's just not actually very good, but like people really, really like the idea of this card. Gaining the life, drawing a card. This can have a ton of synergy depending on the type of deck that you're building, and I expect people will have fun with this as they often do. I mean, life gain is one of those mechanics that just really resonates with some players. Ruined Halo, kind of an interesting printing in the fact that it brings a card that was already in Modern but wasn't in Pioneer into Pioneer. So Ruined Halo is probably going to tank in value, I would imagine. But whatever. I mean, it's really not the most exciting card for collectors or anything. Like, it's really supposed to be an answer to repetitive strategies that are predictable, and that's what this can do. If your opponent is trying to beat you down with Tarmogoyfs every single game, this can really blank all of them for 2 mana, and if you can defend it. Sanctum of Tranquil Light. The Sanctums kind of need to be talked about all together, but basically they work off of each other. They cost 1 less for each, the activated ability here costs 1 less for each shrine you control. So there are 5 different colors plus a Wooburg version, which will Voltron together for some fun casual play and maybe a highly memorable limited deck as well. Seasoned Hollowblade, a 3/1 for 2. Again, a type of stat line that I can get behind, and you can also discard a card and tap him to give indestructible until end of turn. The fact that the tap happens after the colon means that you just discard a card and then you tap him and gain indestructible. So if he's already attacked, you can do that. If you're blocking, you can do that. Really, the only reason that matters is like multiplayer games. That way you can't just keep having him open as a blocker. If you do make him indestructible, he'll go away for the rest of the combat steps until your untap step. So definitely a card that I would play the heck out of in Limited. And if I'm playing an aggressive white strategy, which I often have in the past. Secure the Scene. Exile target non-land permanent. Its controller creates a 1/1 white soldier token. 5 mana kind of wrecks this for most applications. The sorcery speed's also not super exciting. It does exile any non-land permanent, so it's a Desert Twister for 1 less mana, but they get a 1/1 white soldier. Could possibly see some type of play in like a group hug style deck where they can't feel as bad because you give them a 1/1, but that's about it. Not super excited about that card. Selfless Savior. You can sacrifice it to give another target creature you control indestructible until end of turn. Probably not the type of card I'd be sleeving up in Limited. Just the 1/1s for 1. You just don't really win games with those. It takes like 20 turns to win. If you have by comparison, a 2 mana 3/1, that's 7 turns to win. It's like 3 times faster. You're letting your opponent draw 13 more cards on you when you're trying to win in this route. And just the longer the game goes, the worse they are. So 1/1s just tend to be pretty terrible for 1 in Limited. But what a good boy. And kind of a sad card that he's just going to sacrifice himself for some other creature. Siege Striker, 3 mana 1/1 with double strike. Whenever it attacks, you can tap any number of untapped creatures you control to give it +1/+1 until end of turn for each tapped creature this way. This guy can push through some massive damage, particularly if you can clear the way, but it's definitely a big risk. A 1/1 for 3 mana. The double strike kind of effectively makes it a 2/1, which also isn't great for those stats, and I'd be surprised if this one isn't more of a trap than anything. We haven't seen enough token generation to be super excited about a card like this. Perhaps when we get to green, there'll be some there. Sigiled Contender, 4 mana, 3/3. But what an interesting upside. It gets lifelink as long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it, effectively making it, when it works, at least a 4/4 with lifelink for 4. This is definitely a solid target for lifelink. Swinging and gaining huge chunks of life like that is pretty devastating, and it also, with that size of a body, often sets up situations where your removal is just incredibly good. If your opponent ends up trying to double block a card like this, you can kill one of their creatures, your 4/4 squishes their other blocker, you're gaining 4 life. Hopefully your opponent doesn't just quit Magic for good, because that's exactly what this type of card tends to produce, is carnage when it works correctly. Speaker of the Heavens, Vigilance, lifelink, 1/1. Kind of pushing the theme here. They got a lot of 1/1s for 1, but this one does have a really interesting activated ability. You can create a 4/4 Angel if you have 7 more life than your starting total. You just tap this guy, get a 4/4. That is tempting. Now, this is really only good when you're winning, and 7 extra life is a ton. So maybe this just sees play in Commander, but I'm sure some people will try it in Limited. When they win with it, they will absolutely crush. The first time you tap it to get a 4/4, you're probably just winning the game. And then every turn after that, everything is just getting more and more ridiculous. But you know what? For all the games that you're going to play this and not have it come together, you might as well have it be spectacular when it actually works. Staunch Shieldmate, a 1-power, 1 casting cost creature. Not super excited about that one. Swift Response. Love this type of removal. 2 mana, destroy target tapped creature. It's a little bit better in the more controlling strategies than it is in the aggressive decks. A lot of the time, the aggressive decks are facing down creatures that are just sitting back, so you can't actually remove your opponent's creatures until they go on the offensive. But that said, 2 mana, destroying target tapped creature, definitely a powerful effect for Limited. Tempered Veteran, you can pay 1 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that already has a +1/+1 counter, or 6 to tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. The fact that this is a 2 mana 1/2 feels like you're going to get run over way before this is actually online, and then the 6 mana investment side is pretty rough. If you do have a way of getting +1/+1 counters on creatures, then this could potentially be solid enough, but this feels like it's just a little too cute, even for Limited. Valorous Steed, a 5 mana Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 Knight with Vigilance. So we're talking 5 power for 5 mana. This is probably going to be an excellent top-end curve for aggressive white strategies, as you've got an awful lot. And then, of course, blinking or returning it to your hand, anything like that, getting extra use out of the ETB can be meaningful when you're talking about making a stream of 2/2s. Vryn's Wingmate, a downshifted rarity here. This was a rare in the past. Flying, non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. This is a flying Thalia, but that 3 mana prevents it from seeing much play in Constructed, though I have seen some Death and Extra Taxes decks that have actually slotted in some extra Wingmares to try and create extra taxing effects. I've even seen Glow Rider and Lodestone Golem and that type of thing, but overall the 3 mana prevents it from being particularly good in Constructed. 2 power Flyer for 3. If you really don't have much non-creature spells in your deck, I could definitely see playing this in Limited. Warded Battlements, a 3 mana 0/3. Attacking creatures you control get +1/+0 with Defender. I'm not actually sure what to make of that on first take. I mean, initially it feels absolutely horrible. It's possible that in a draft, this type of Anthem effect could be good enough depending on the meta. The fact that it can block may make this better than like a glorious Anthem style effect, which, depending on how quick this format ends up being, this ends up feeling terrible for taking essentially a turn off and not adding a bunch of extra attackers, or actually just adds an extra bit of gas for your flyers. I suppose this type of thing is better when we're talking about flying creatures that white seems to have a bunch of. And that brings us back around. All right, this clocked in at about 33 minutes, so I'm going to go through the rest of the colors as well and see if I can do it a little bit faster. Let me know what you think about this one, guys. Thanks for watching.